Between renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, threatening a trade war with Canada, threatening a hot war with Denmark and Panama, and imposing sanctions on the ICC, it's no secret that President Donald Trump is making a long list of enemies abroad. But his latest foreign target seems to be inspired not by America First policy or even his own petty vendettas, but by the shadow president of the United States, Elon Musk, who is bent on attacking his country of birth, South Africa. Yes, last week, just days after Musk railed against the South African government over a new land ownership law meant to address the legacy of apartheid, Trump signed an executive order cutting off all US aid to South Africa and effectively endorsing the far-right conspiracy theory that the country is engaged in a white genocide. Joining me now to discuss Trump, Musk, and South Africa is none other than the country's ambassador to the United States and a veteran of the ANC and the anti-apartheid struggle, Ebrahim Rasool. Ambassador Rasool, thank you for joining me on Mehdi Unfiltered.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here.
South Africa has been making quite a few headlines here in the US this past week after the decision to freeze aid by the president. The White House said this was because of a new law in South Africa that makes it easier for your government to take away land from farm owners, which the White House said, quote, blatantly discriminates against ethnic minority Afrikaners. How concerned are your government by the freeze in aid? But not just the freeze in aid, but Trump's attacks on your country and suggestions that it's a racist law.
Look, we've braced ourselves for our turn in the line.
Okay.
It is not that we think we are exceptional as a country, but it is that President Trump has turned out to be an equal opportunity offender. You've mentioned all the trouble he's been looking for with other countries, mostly benign, but sometimes very real people like China as well. And I think that they've had a bee in their bonnet with South Africa. But as with Canada, fentanyl was the pretext for a trade war with Canada and the 51st state fantasy.
Yes.
South Africa, the Afrikaner issue, land expropriation issue, was the one. So are we concerned? I think the United States does have the capacity to hurt us. Are we panicking? No, we're not. We're a dignified country. We've seen worse in our history over 300 years of colonialism and apartheid. Are we angry? I think there are people who are angry, but our government is keeping its head because we believe that we've got to sit this out. We've got to engage the administration. We've got to wait for Congress to lose their fear. And we've
might be waiting a while.
And we've got to make sure that the American people continue to support us.
So Trump cut off this aid just shortly after his top advisor and donor, Elon Musk, referred to the Expropriation Act as an openly racist law, he said. This comes after years of Musk attacking your government in South Africa, even accusing your president, Cyril Ramaphosa, of being silent on what Musk has described as calls genocide of white people in South Africa. I'm curious to know, Ambassador, what has it been like to watch perhaps the most famous South African ever, after Nelson Mandela, obtain so much power here in the US and use it to spread misinformation and even cut off aid to his country of birth?
So sometimes you need to let someone shoot off his mouth.
Okay.
Because even his own supporters back home are reeling under the impact of what has been occasioned. They know that there is no land confiscation. They know that 30 years later, this is the most benign land reform act that has come in. They know that Afrikaners and whites own 70% of the land to this day and all the farms, mostly in South Africa. So they know the truth of the situation. Even the far right-wing white Afrikaner organizations have spent the weekend distancing themselves, saying, oh, we did complain to Trump, but we didn't expect this. We did.
But he's offering them refugee status in the US.
He's offering refugee status. Who will give up their farms, their townhouses, and their seaside resorts to come and live in a tent in Arizona?
A real persecuted minority.
A real persecuted minority.
Although Musk, just to be devil's advocate, Musk and Trump would say just because they own 70% of the land, just because of the legacy of apartheid, doesn't mean your government should be able to just take their land away from them without due process.
You see, the law is about due process. Since the resolution in the ANC in 2017 to 2024 has been an extensive constitutional amendment to ensure that there is no injustice, that food security is never threatened, that firstly, state land is available for those who have been dispossessed of their land, black people, followed by underutilized land, and followed finally by properly expropriated private land. So that is not even, and that's the specter they want to conjure up, a Zimbabwe specter. There is no prospect of a Zimbabwean specter in South Africa. So the point of the matter is, I don't always know what the term means, but hoist by their own petard. I think that is the moment for Elon Musk when even his own supporters are turning against him.
Are you worried about how much power this shadow president has in the US and that he's using it? I mean, he's doing a lot of things. If you're online, Doge and cutting funding and all sorts of vendettas, but he's using it partly to go after South Africa. Are you worried about that?
I think we are worried, but South Africa will not be falling into the temptation that President Trump and Mr. Musk has fallen into themselves, and that is to interfere in the internal politics of other countries, as was done with Britain and Germany and others. We will not interfere with Mr. Trump's choices. And so let me withhold that comment, because otherwise I will be doing what they are accused of doing. I think we are worried because on the other end of an ill-advised, misinformed decision are 20,000 health workers, are millions of HIV people who require treatment.
In South Africa,
in
who've been
South
cut
Africa,
off from USAID.
who have been cut off from all of that aid. Are
Will
200
people die
NGOs
in South Africa because of this decision?
I think that we will do what we need to do to prevent that scenario. We don't want a scenario to unfold just to say, I told you so. We will do what must be done, but I think the consequences remain dire.
In that attack where Elon Musk described those calls for genocide of white people in South Africa, he specifically referenced a viral video from a couple of years ago, which he reposted again over the weekend, of Julius Malema, who's one of the opposition party leaders, singing the anti-apartheid song Kill the Boer at one of his rallies, referring to Afrikaner farmers. What did you make of Musk's reposting of that video? And what would you say to people who say, that's horrific, that song?
You see, I think that a party like the Republican Party can learn from how the ANC dealt with its populists. It expelled Julius Malema. He was not good for the reconciliation program, and ironically, 11 February is the day that Nelson Mandela was released 35 years ago. On this day, in honor of Nelson Mandela, we have committed and always committed ourselves to a reconciliation program with whites. And when populists emerge within our party to foment racial war and to create racism and otherization of other people, we have dealt with the Julius Malema. That is why he's formed his own party and no longer in the ANC.
But Musk, who ironically claims to be a free speech absolutist, would say, why is he allowed to say this stuff, incite hatred and violence, which is what he seemed to be doing in that song? That's the argument.
Look, I think that we can do a tit for tat and say, why are Mexicans called this? Why are Hispanics called that? Why are Latinos called that? But that's not the game that we want to play. We want an intelligent conversation with the US government. We want a fact-based conversation, a rational and reasonable conversation. We don't want to trade insults because we can't out-trade populists with insults, because we have been taught in the tradition of a Nelson Mandela to always look for our better angels to guide us.
This past summer, after the ANC lost its 30-year majority, the party formed a coalition government with the white-led Democratic Alliance Party. Now, not only does the Democratic Alliance oppose setting a minimum wage, it opposes the ANC's universal healthcare plan, but they've also been accused of trying to protect the economic privileges of some of these white South Africans you mentioned earlier, living on resorts and owning farms. I have to ask, why did the party of Nelson Mandela choose the Democratic Alliance, as a partner, a group that is actively fighting against what you say are your attempts to deal with the legacy of apartheid? Were you trying to garner good PR with the West? Are you just in a very uniquely weak position? What's going on in South Africa?
So before answering that question, let me preface it by saying, within the last 4 decades, what has happened after the election last year would count as the second miracle in South Africa following the transition led by Nelson Mandela. The second miracle in South Africa is that a ruling Liberation Party lost its majority and formed a government of national unity after accepting the results of that election. Not contesting, not storming the parliament, but accepting the result, forming a government, even with people that it finds unsavory on a policy level, and then understanding that that is the mandate of the people to find a common cause, even with those who disagree with you, as long as there is civility in the politics and there is the space to talk and not trade insults.
And the Democratic Alliance, the DA, has actually said that they think the law, this Land Expropriation Act, is unconstitutional. I think they've taken legal action, which is weird for a coalition partner to do. Is there going to be a resolution to this? Are you going to pull this controversial law, given your coalition partners don't like it, the US government doesn't like it? What's the position of the South African government?
The rule of law applies. They are going to the Constitutional Court. Let them test it in the Constitutional Court and we'll abide by it. That is the rule of law. That is the miracle of South Africa, that we can differ so fundamentally on cardinal issues and resolve it through discussion, if not through voting in Parliament, if not through appeals to the Constitutional Court.
Just this week, Semaphore reported that your government may let some of Musk's companies that are looking to invest in South Africa bypass your country's black economic empowerment policy. Is that something you're okay with? And wouldn't that just be a reward for Elon Musk's bad behavior to say, you can threaten us and accuse us of white genocide, but hey, we'll bend over backwards for you, come into our country, invest in our country, we'll bend the laws for you because you're a rich billionaire?
Our president, in his State of the Nation address last week, basically said, South Africa will not be bullied. We are...
But it sounds like you are being bullied if you're allowing Musk to come into your country and invest in your companies without sticking to the laws that everyone else has to.
We negotiate those kind of things all the time.
Looks bad, though.
No, it does. But I think the fact of the matter is that investment is important, but we have also proven not at all costs. Not at the cost of our dignity, not at the cost of our pride as a nation.
A cynic or a critic might say, hold on, South African government got attacked by Elon Musk. The US president, on Musk's insistence, cut off aid to South Africa. And now the South African government is saying to Elon Musk, hey, come and invest, the normal rules don't apply. It looks like you rolled over for a bullying campaign and a foreign billionaire.
No, that is not the case. What we are saying is that these are conversations that preceded the Trump presidency.
Have you given others the same exemption from your black empowerment laws, or just Elon Musk?
I think that in any event, there are offset agreements, and sometimes there are more value to contracting black contractors who roll out your programs than diluting the ownership of your own company. There are companies that don't dilute ownership, but then they engage in other offset agreements. So I don't know the status of those negotiations, but I certainly know that there are options. And I think that the South African government, after the president's speech last week, would be very reluctant to engage in what would appear like a climb down.
So in December 2023, South Africa filed a case famously against Israel at the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide in its war on Gaza. It's now been over a year since that case was filed and heard in court. What is the latest on that case and South Africa's approach to that case?
So South Africa laid the charge. It contracted a great team of legal experts. A few months ago, 2 months ago, we filed our memorial, which is the body of evidence that is there. I think we now would trust the judges of the court to do its work. We now trust our legal team to go and argue the case. We now trust the veracity of our memorial, the evidence that we have put there, and we trust the ability of Israel and its partners to prove the point as they continue to make utterances of the Riviera in Gaza, as they continue to fantasize about decanting Palestinians out of, they actually prove the point of our evidence.
Well, we're speaking on the same morning that Israeli Communications Minister Shlomo Karhi called for the halting of all aid and the halting of all electricity and food, which is what got them to the ICJ in the first place. On Friday, the White House not only cited the Expropriation Act as one of the reasons for freezing its aid to South Africa, but also your ICJ case against Israel. They literally put it in their statement. Sounds to me, and I wonder, does it sound to you as if you're being punished for taking a stance against genocide by the United States government?
So fentanyl was the pretext for tariffs against Canada and pulling it into line. I think the land issue was the pretext.
But the real issue is Gaza.
For other issues, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, whether it is our membership of BRICS. I think that there is a need to rein in South Africa as a proxy for the growing multilateralism that I think is taking root in the world.
Well, we've seen over a dozen countries join South Africa's ICJ case against Israel: Spain, Ireland, Libya, Mexico, and many others. Were you surprised to see South Africa get that kind of support on the global stage on an issue as divisive, controversial as this one?
I think we knew that we had popular support across the world, even amongst young Jews who said, "Not in my name," campus students across the Western world. That was really great. The fact that countries in the West, like Spain, like Ireland and others, have actually joined us is the surprise. I think that was a pleasant surprise, if I could say that, because you don't want to sit with the usual suspects, the Cubas, the Bolivias, and so forth, because those are the usual suspects in standing up for the rights of the Palestinians. So I think that is where Israel may think that's where the trench must be drawn outside the lines of South Africa. If we cut off South Africa, we intimidate the rest of the world.
You mentioned the usual suspects standing up for Palestine. I mean, South Africa, in that sense, under the ANC since the Mandela and now Ramaphosa and before that period, has talked very passionately about the rights of the South Africans. You've had people like the late Desmond Tutu talk about apartheid in occupied territories. Is the position of the South African government not just that there's genocide going on in Gaza, but that the occupation is a form of apartheid?
I think that the growing consensus in South Africa is whatever we've experienced in South Africa is on steroids in Palestine.
In terms of
we
apartheid
have
and
never
violence.
had bombs dropped on us by the white supremacist apartheid government. We have never had soldiers deployed with automatic weapons to mow us down. We have never had situation where no food was allowed into our townships. We've never had the bombing of hospitals and schools and universities where black students were. And so the point of the matter is that the template of apartheid has been completely magnified. That's the consensus that is growing. That is the kind of DNA that we recognized as South Africans when Nelson Mandela said what he did, what he said, what Desmond Tutu said, and what drove President Ramaphosa to say, let us, because we have suffered enormously, but they are suffering more. Let us intervene in this.
You mentioned a moment ago about the Gaza becoming the Riviera and Trump's plan and Israel's plan to, quote unquote, relocate the Palestinians from Gaza to somewhere else. Do you see that as ethnic cleansing, as a war crime, as a breach of international law? How would you describe what you heard from Donald Trump saying, I'm going to take over Gaza and they can't come back, he said on Sunday to Fox?
Look, I don't want to use terms colloquially when they have deep legal meaning. When we did the genocide case, we tested it against the rules of international law and the rules of the ICJ and did not come to that decision lightly. It's not a throwaway remark. We never used genocide, for example, in the case of black South Africans. We used massacre. When 500 students on one day were mowed down in Soweto, we never said that there was a genocide because we know that words have consequences. So I think we should leave it to a legal opinion whether ethnic cleansing is the intention of what is happening in Gaza, in Palestine as a whole. But I do think
the specific Trump plan to get rid of the people and say they can't come back.
I would say that it is devious, at least it is demonic, at worst.
And just a few weeks ago, you're very outspoken in your support for Palestinians, both as an ambassador and as a private citizen prior to coming back to government. The Hill newspaper here joined a bunch of other right-wing pro-Israel sites in running a piece attacking you. The headline was, Biden quietly approved South Africa's pro-Hamas envoy. Trump should fire him. That was the headline. The article goes on to accuse you of hosting senior Hamas officials, about gloating about receiving a signed kafaya from Ismail Haniyeh, one of the former leaders of Hamas who was killed. What's your response to all of these allegations and attacks on you?
Look, I'd be worried if they saw me as a non-entity. So I did expect pushback. I think lies are something else. I was in a Hamas gathering with Fatah, with Palestinian civil society, in order to try and teach the South African lesson for negotiating a way out when all other means have failed, and when your strong point is no longer weapons or anything like that. It is going to have to be your intellect and your tongue. And that, so I've got no apologies. I've even been engaging the Taliban in the last month in order to move them away from the idea of an Islamic state to one that is what we call a citizenship-based state, as opposed, that's what the World for All Foundation does across the world. It is about building coexistence and so forth. So that's what I've done. The scarf by Ismail Haniyeh was a gift. He was at that point the prime minister, elected prime minister of Gaza. And South Africa recognized the election as free and fair.
Last question to you. You mentioned apartheid. You've mentioned US aid and saving the people in South Africa who are going to suffer. You mentioned Gaza. You mentioned Afghanistan. I often ask a lot of guests this question at the end, and I think you're ideally placed to answer it. As someone who fought against apartheid and won, came out triumphant. You're now back in government. We are decades later. You've been ambassador here before. This is another stint for you. The world is a much more dangerous place, many would argue. Gaza genocide is still ongoing. How do you keep hope alive? How do you stay hopeful when so much seems dark and gloomy around you?
You know, the definition of faith in the religion I adhere to, Islam, is to believe in that which you have not yet seen. And that is what kept us alive. The slogan under apartheid was freedom in our lifetime. And it was the hope that what we have not yet seen or experienced will become a reality. I think in much the same way, the world needs to have hope and faith, because not out of some blind adherence, but because we believe in the innate goodness of people. We believe that lies have short legs. We believe that we've got to sit out moments of darkness in order for us eventually to prevail. But most importantly, the faith is in our own ability to resist and our own ability to work for what we want to see as we go forward. The difference between just sheer optimism is when you don't have a plan to work, when you don't have a vision. I think we have a vision, and we've got to stick to our plan, and we've got to overcome the obstacles as they come, and we understand that this too shall pass.
Well said, Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool. Thank you for appearing on Mehdi Unfiltered.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.